there's so much potential to be had, but everybody's just kind of like doing it in their own way. And I think one of
Yes.
the characters even says it too. Like everybody has an idea of how they want to save the world. They just have different ways of doing it.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what makes this role so interesting, right? Because you kind of have the vault people that we meet, right? They have their own idea of like, okay, cool. How are we going to save society, right? We have the Brotherhood of Steel, who we meet through Max, and we get to see about them, and kind of they have ultimately like kind of this power, right? Because they have all these like guns and everything like that. So they might be small in number, but they obviously have a very significant impact. I think they even kind of mentioned that they're kind of like a lot of the stuff is like remnants of like the government before it collapsed.
right.
In essence, is how they have access to all this tech that they utilize. And then we kind of see some other stuff like the Enclave, right? So this is where I think kind of a cool segue, right, is where we meet in the second episode, right? We meet the doctor, Ziggy Wilzig, who's the doctor, who's with the Enclave, which we don't really get a lot about. So I will say that's one of the things that, and maybe we get that in future seasons, but it's one of those things where we don't really get a whole lot about the Enclave. But we find out that, for Max's character and the Brotherhood of Steel, they're trying to get to the Doctor, and then the Ghoul, he's been kind of, I guess, broken out of his coffin to kind of help out, and his mission is to also get Dr. Welzig. So we kind of see how these characters are kind of how they're going to ultimately converge in this story. We talked a little bit about this, but from Max and the Brotherhood of Steel, we get to meet his I guess his knight, right? So in this hierarchy of things, Max is a squire, and each squire is assigned to a knight, and we get to meet Knight Titus. And Knight Titus is a very interesting character, and you talked a little bit about Knight. I'll let you talk about Knight Titus because I know you really like the Brotherhood of Steel. What did you think about Knight Titus and kind of how we get introduced to some of our bigger characters?
Well, as I mentioned before, I mean, the Brotherhood of Steel does have this Mandalorian enclave vibe to it. And I will say that the big reveal of when Max takes his helmet off and we see it's none other than Michael Rappaport, I just thought, yep, it's the Bill Burr effect, because
Mm-hmm.
he's the last person you would expect to be, in a series like Fallout, right? But here he is as this foul-mouthed guy who's just mouthing off on everybody and is just, basically telling the Brotherhood to go screw itself, because even he doesn't follow its precepts, even though he's a knight. But but on another level, I'm just thinking, what? I'm not surprised at all. Like, I mean, they would get someone like Michael Rappaport in there because, again, to go back to my to my example with the Mandalorian, I mean, we didn't expect Bill Burr, a comedian who spent years trashing Star Wars fans, to ever be in the Mandalorian, right? But then when he's in it, like, he just eats up the scene, and he actually does a phenomenal job. So I think in this case, when when you see how serious the Brotherhood is, and they're all cult-like and religious and sort of stoic in their demeanor, to have this knight who's just mouthing off and is just saying, yeah, these guys are actually full of shit and they don't really know what they're doing. They're a bunch of crazy kooks, and I don't even know why I'm buying into this. I think it's just brilliant,
Yeah,
because it shows that, because it shows, like, it actually isn't this monolithic structure. There are people in it who apparently aren't buying into it, but they're in it nonetheless because they've got their own ulterior motives.
yeah, absolutely. It shows just how dysfunctional this group is, right? Because you have to question, like, how is this guy a knight, right? How does he have any like standing within this group of people? Because he's such a nasty asshole. And like I said, like, he goes out of his way, like, he's just like, you know what? We're on this mission. I just want to go kill something. And then you see, like, when he ends up kind of fighting this, like, I guess kind of like this bear, right? It's not like a bear like what we think of a bear.
I think it's like
It's
a mutated
obviously
bear or
mutated,
something.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we kind of this mutated bear, And it's so funny because he's got this like power armor in essence, right? That he's able to utilize, but he is an absolute coward. And like you see him running away, he gets kind of into this fight with the bear, and he pretty much gets defeated. And I think it just shows how corrupt and how mismanaged the Brotherhood of Steel is at this stage, because like we see this knight and he's just sitting there and he's just like telling Max like, why are you not getting me, my meds? Like, what are you doing? I'm going to kill you and all this stuff. And you have to be wondering to yourself, like, wow, like, is this how all the knights are, or is this just an offshoot? And it always made me very curious how messed up the Brotherhood is nowadays, because it just seems like they just have the worst people in the worst positions. And I like how, I kind of liked Max's character with this, where he just like flat out is like, you know what, I don't care, you can die, right? And I like that, right? I like characters that are okay with being morally ambiguous, right? Because very much like I think, I would say for most people, right, if you had somebody that was sitting there berating you, threatening you, and everything like that, you probably wouldn't be siding with them very much. And I like how, we kind of see Max kind of have this realization, like, you know what, it's actually probably better off if you die, because you're clearly not going to be doing me any benefit in the future. And I like that, right? Because I think we see a lot of superhero stuff nowadays where these characters are kind of like just so like altruistic, right? Like, I can't kill anybody. It goes against everything. But really, we as human beings, right, we're morally gray. And I like being able to see that, especially with Max's character. So, but yeah, he ends up getting his power armor, right? So he ends up, Knight Titus dies. He ends up suiting up with the power armor, and he's off to Philly to find Ziggy Wilzig. And we also have the Ghoul is there in Philly as well. And we also have, of course, Lucy, who ends up being there. And this is where we find out that Ziggy Wilzig, the doctor, right, he's trying to get to Moldaver because he has a chip that's implanted in him that he's trying to get to her. And we won't get into, we'll get to that a little bit later, but that's kind of where all of our characters kind of converges in Philly, where they're all ultimately after Dr. Wilzig, and it's in really the grand scheme of things to get to Moldaver, who I think right now we kind of view as the villain of the show, and we find out later on that that's really not the case. But yeah, that's kind of how we get all of our characters kind of in their starting positions, and very much in Fallout fashion, right? Like, Lucy's on ultimately a quest to save her father, but then she pretty much gets sidetracked with a whole bunch of other bullshit. And I think that does very well in the world of Fallout, because there's always this overarching story, but you always have about 1,000 side quests that you end up taking on.
Yeah,
To
exactly.
kind of do things. So yeah, that's kind of our introduction to all three of our characters. So what do you think about I guess just being able to see Max, and how do you view kind of the Brotherhood of Steel from kind of our, I guess, initial introduction to them?
I mean, the Brotherhood of Steel. Let's just put it out there. They're visually cool, right?
Oh,
I mean, you said it yourself. The armor's cool. The ships are cool. Everything. But but you kind of get this feeling that there's something amiss, right? And obviously, obviously from the very beginning, just the way that the recruits kind of treat each other. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. And you kind of also kind of get this mentality that that the Brotherhood doesn't really care about hazing or anything like that.
Not
Really,
at all.
because they're just there to like just treat people like shit. Um, now I will say I will say, when Dane gets selected as a squire at the very beginning and everybody's just like cheering, you kind of feel like, oh, okay, so yeah, they may give each other shit, but when someone finally gets the promotion, like all of a sudden they're like, buddy, hey, congratulations. But then But then when you see what happens to Dane later on, where I think his was it the razors in the boots or
There's a
something?
razor blade in their
Yeah,
boots.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you come to find out, oh yeah, like yeah, they'll definitely like put on this like face of solidarity, but man, they're a bunch of assholes.
Yes.
Like it's literally, I mean, maybe it literally could be a cutthroat world. So, in anybody who's familiar with the Brotherhood of Steel will know that they're pretty ruthless in the way that they impose order, right? I mean, the way that they do it to to each other is no more different than the way that they would impose order on anybody else who's not within the Brotherhood of Steel. Um, I will say this: a few things that were a bit jarring about that base. Um, that scene where Max visits Dane in the infirmary, and Dane tells him, "Yeah, you get rations here. At least nobody steals them." I'm like, okay, so there's very much the Spartan, military education system where you're encouraged to steal from everybody to survive. So they kind of like hammer home that ideology, do whatever you can to survive, as long as you don't screw the Brotherhood over, right? And then there's that scene where Max is being interrogated by one of the clerics, and kind of, and like, at least when I'm watching it, I kind of get the feeling like is he supposed to say something that they want to hear? Because you
Mhm.
kind of you kind of get the hint. I don't know about you, but I kind of get the feeling like when they're interrogating him, they're kind of like egging him on, saying, "Hey, this is what we want you to say if you want to get this." And and it kind of get the feeling Max says it, but he's not really sure about it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, I think it shows just how corrupt the idea of like the Brotherhood of Steel is just to its core. It
Mhm.
just has a very backwards mentality that we really can't get our heads wrapped around.
Well, I will say there was one other scene where Max is in the barracks, and he's just sitting there, and as the camera pans, you notice one guy's beating off in the bed,
Yes.
and I'm just
Once
sitting there. I'm
again,
like,
sex ed really important for the Brotherhood of Steel.
and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, really? He's doing this in the daytime with everybody else around? All right. Apparently, this guy is shameless. Like he's just beating one out, and nobody's batting an eyelid. So, I mean, because I don't think that there aren't any women in the organization, correct? It's just
Yeah, no, it is very I do not recall seeing a single female character in that, which is why I think
yeah,
that they purposely do that, right? Is because it's all male for a reason, because I think they're under the idea that, females are just a distraction, and that's why, they act the way that they are because, well, I mean, there ain't no ladies around, so
yeah. So
options are
basically,
kind of limited.
it's like a cross between a fraternity and a monastery. And if you give them
Yes,
guns,
yes,
basically.
yes. Yep. So, and actually, I think you bring up such a good point with kind of the Brotherhood of Steel, because I think we really see that with Max, and we kind of start to see him maybe kind of breaking out of that idea, because Max is very power hungry, right? Like, I like his character because he's like, okay, cool. I let Knight Titus die. Well, guess what? Now I'm gonna be the, I'm gonna have the suit now. So I like that, and we kind of see where, because now he's kind of impersonating Knight Titus, he ends up getting a new squire, which is a character called Thaddeus, who we see in the beginning used to bully him, right? And we see that for Max. He kind of enjoys the power. And I like that because he has no problem like just kind of bullying Thaddeus, like he was bullied by Thaddeus before, like he was bullied by Knight Titus when he became a squire. So I really enjoy the fact that we see a character just kind of have this very human emotion, right? Like he has no problem, like, hey, I've been treated like shit. Maybe it's kind of nice for someone else to get a taste of their own medicine.
Yeah, yeah. He takes off his cod piece and tosses it to him.
Exactly, just like Knight Titus did on the ship. So,
Yep.
just a very cool kind of just to see his character. But we also see him, kind of that's his initial reaction, but you kind of start to see Max mellow out a little bit more. And I think this is where we start to see some of that good character development because, as much as, like I said, I wasn't a huge fan of Max in it, he does absolutely come off as a guy that, kind of starts off as being kind of this dick because that's how he knows that he feels like that's the way he should act, right? Because that's how everyone else acts around him, right? Everyone's a bunch of dicks. So for him, he has to kind of like realize, like, oh, even though I'm kind of treating Thaddeus like shit, they kind of have that nice moment where we find out that Thaddeus, he used to be the guy that everyone got bullied by, right? So Thaddeus is the one that was always being bullied. And he just was like, oh, Max shows up and now, oh, let's just pick on Max now instead. So we see very much for Max's character, he's like, oh, Thaddeus was really just me, right? Like, he was a guy that was being bullied. He was the one that was kind of the outcast. And Thaddeus did the best he could to kind of turn that around. And unfortunately, Max ended up being his crosshairs. But yeah, I do kind of like some of that bond that we see with Max as he kind of at least breaks a little bit out of that power hungry phase. I would say while we have that going on with Max, we get our first kind of character to character interaction where we have Lucy and the Ghoul. They're kind of meet together because we see Lucy. She needed to I guess help Dr. Wilzig to get to Moldaver, and unfortunately he gets injured along the way, and because of that she cuts off his head in very kind of very matter-of-fact type of attitude.
Well, to be fair, he didn't give her much of a choice because he took a cyanide pill. So.
Yes, yeah. It totally makes logical sense in it. It's just very jarring to have this kind of character that we meet and he gets his head cut off. And that's what we have a traveling head. And this is where we get to see a little bit more of Lucy and the Ghoul's interaction, because we have Lucy carrying the head and the Ghoul also interested in that, and kind of their clashing personas, because you got Lucy, who is I think a very sweet character, right? Very much gullible to the world. And you have the Ghoul, who's absolutely the exact opposite. Like, he's lived in this world on and off for 220 years now, plus however long he was alive prior to kind of the start of the show. So if there's anybody that understands more about it, it's him. And you kind of see how the Ghoul is constantly almost like taunting her to be like, hey, you know what? You're going to need to grow up really quickly because you can't have this type of attitude. So how did you like Lucy and the Ghoul's kind of like, I would say, very contrasting personalities?
I mean, I mentioned it before. It's this student-teacher dynamic where it's like, where the Ghoul is pretty much saying, hey, this is how things are. Better you learn it from me now than find out later from somebody else who might do even worse. Like, that's even possible. I think the one scene where it kind of just shows the absurdity of the whole situation was when remember when they're outside that supermarket, and what does he bite off her finger or does he cut it off?
Bites it off.
He bites it off because she took off one of his fingers. So
oh no, wait, I think she bit off his and then he cut off hers. I think
that's right. Yeah, it was like it was like an eye for an eye kind of thing, or finger for finger, as it were. So so I think if anything, I think that's the moment where Lucy finally comes to a realization. Yeah, the world is actually not as nice as it seems to be, because even when she's like in Philly, you kind of get the feeling that she still believes that everybody is good at heart, even though everybody says, yeah, Vault Dwellers are a bunch of shitheads, or whatever the effect. And even when she's wandering the wasteland, before, she kind of gets this idea that maybe nobody's that bad. But when she actually loses a body part in that instance, is like, that's when she changes. Like, that's when she comes to that realization, I think, that maybe being this happy-go-lucky, naive, maybe that's not the way to go after all.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I agree with you. And I think we see that change kind of continue, right? Because the Ghoul takes Lucy to try to sell her off, right? It was pretty much at the
he's doing it for meds, because remember, they get smashed up when that weird fish monster destroys
Yeah, I
the
think it was
pack
called like
thing.
a Zolotol or something. But yeah, like he in essence is there, and he's trying to sell her off, and like you just kind of see Lucy's reaction to everything that's happening. And I think you kind of start to see more and more of that persona shift, right? And you even see it visibly as well because she starts to kind of like she looks more like a raider, right? I really love that transition, right? Because she's in there, and she's trying to be like sold off, and we meet was it Cogsworth, right?
Snip, snip. Yeah.
Oh, was that the name? I'm sorry, I don't even know where I got mine then, so just ignore me on that. But
I think I think that was the name of the actor who provided the
oh, thank
voice,
you. Yes,
and
thank
then
you. Okay,
but the
maybe that's
robot
what it
himself
was.
is
So
Snip Snip. Yeah.
snip snip, thank you. But yeah, so in essence, like the robot's very upfront, like, hey, I'm gonna harvest your organs. Um,
Yeah, but
and
not before he replaces her finger. So
I know, yeah, I did think that was weird. I guess it was maybe just to placate her a little bit, but that definitely was very odd to me. That they're gonna do that. But you kind of see how she ultimately kind of reacts to everything, and you really start to see her character harden, and you kind of see the ghoul kind of says like, "Hey, eventually you're gonna be kind of like me and be very cutthroat." And we kind of see that's how she starts to almost act, where she's a little bit more, I would say, out for herself. And even her attire changes, where she kind of starts to look more and more like a raider. Like this is the one scene where we see her outside of her blue vault jumpsuit. And I think it's, very telling from a character standpoint. Not only do we see how her personality is changing, but it's also causing this kind of physically different manifestation. I really liked how that looked. Did you notice that at all, or am I looking too much into it?
well, yeah, she's definitely going for more of this Sarah Connor, look by
Yes.
by the end, but but later on, like she kind of resumes that look. So she kind of, in a weird way, like she sort of like breaks under the pressure because she finally sees the world through Cooper's eyes. But then she kind of remembers, oh, I still believe in goodness, and so she kind of goes back,
Absolutely. Yes.
back to
Yes.
that look. So it's just like only for a very brief moment.
Absolutely, and I like that, right? Because I think it just goes to show that her character has that vulnerability to it, right? And I think that just shows it very well, where she does have this breaking point that she can only take so much shit before she kind of loses it. But then I think just because she just has this really strong personality about herself, that she just doesn't let it break her. So but yeah, I did really like that, and I think that's where we kind of see kind of her escaping the ghoul's clutches, and she's kind of out on her own after the whole sequence where the ghoul ends up kind of like getting all the meds, and definitely much needed getting those meds so he doesn't become feral.
But I mean,
Um,
like he also has a change of heart too, in a way as well. Because because after that episode, he's still cynical and everything, but you could sort of see like there's a shift in his character. At least that's what I thought. Because
Interesting.
because remember when he's like lying there on the ground, and Lucy just walks in and gives him like the vials, and she says, I'm never going to be anything like you, right?
That's a good
Um,
point. Yeah.
but you flash forward to the end of the episode, he's like, he offers Lucy, a chance to come and join him on his quest, and you kind of get the feeling that, had he never experienced that kind of emotion, I don't, or the kind of treatment from Lucy, at that store, I don't think he would have given her a second thought, right?
Yeah.
So
No, that's a good
so
point.
so he sort of comes to let go of his cynicism, and begins to say, maybe I can trust people, again. Maybe not completely, but to
Yeah.
a degree.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think there definitely is a little bit of warming of his heart. So yeah, and I think this is where we kind of get a little bit of a breakout for our characters, where we're all kind of going on our separate paths, and we start to see a little bit more of Max and Thaddeus' relationship, and we start to see them like they're really starting to become friends, right? And I think what kind of gets really what was very bizarre to me was, Max kind of has this revelation that, hey, I'm going to stop pretending to be Knight Titus, and I'm going to kind of reveal myself to Thaddeus.
Like, why would you do that, dude? Come
yes,
on.
like it was very. I got it, but then when you see what happens, it's almost like, damn, like it just goes to show, like when you think he's starting to get a little bit vulnerable and starting to feel okay, we kind of see this change where Thaddeus realizes that, oh, like you're just Max, like I don't like you. And then all of a sudden, like before, they were working really well together, right? Like they started to kind of bond to get better. We see Max brands Thaddeus. So we kind of see all that happening. And then as soon as Max tries to reveal himself, it's like, oh no, like now all of a sudden everything changes. And Thaddeus like takes out the power core, right? I think it's called power core, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It leaves him stuck in that armor.
Yeah, it leaves him stuck in the suit. By the way, terrible functionality for that suit, that if you just like take out the battery, that the suit just becomes totally useless. I think I read somewhere that like I think in the games like it automatically ejects the person out of it. Not the case here. So really like Max is pretty much just screwed at this stage because he's stuck on a suit.
But to be fair, he did it to himself.
Of course, yes. Yeah. This is very much his own undoing by, maybe. And it's interesting, right? Because I think, we want Thaddeus and Max to kind of have this okay moment because they've both been mistreated. So for me, like, I was kind of surprised. I was actually kind of hoping that they would have maybe a more like, we're not so bad once we got a chance to just kind of coexist, interact with each other.
Yeah, we're not so different, you and I. Yeah.
Gross. So for me, I was kind of expecting a little bit of a different reaction, but then obviously it doesn't work out. And Thaddeus leaves with the head, right? Because we got Dr. Wilzig's head is going from character to character. So now Thaddeus ends up getting the head at this stage, and he ends up running away with the power core, but he gets injured, like his foot gets really stomped, which we'll see a little bit more later. So we see Thaddeus, kind of leaves him, and Max is kind of in this really vulnerable spot. And lo and behold, who we have show up is Lucy. And I think, this is right after she left the Ghoul. She has this mindset that, this world is kind of a shitty place. And we see her be very, like, she's very much unsure of whether or not she could trust Max. And we see this is kind of where she gets back into that kind of happy-go-lucky Lucy character, because she kind of goes against like what she's kind of seen so far, and she's like, you know what, I'm gonna trust him. Let me help him out of the suit. And